Yeah, I used to always tell people, find something that a lot of people hate, and you'll find a problem that is worth solving.
Welcome to The Power of Construction, a Procore podcast highlighting the industry leaders who are evolving the business today to forge a better future tomorrow. In our last episode, I want to catch you all up. We touched on the shift towards modern leadership styles, as well as talking about succession and really emphasizing the investment in the next generation of leadership. And frankly, we talked a lot about how it's not just about the technology that we're investing in. It's also talking about how we're investing in the new skills required for that next generation of leaders. And today, we want to focus in on a different topic. Today, we really want to talk about the challenge around the data gap in construction. And so when we look at the last 15 years in industry, we've seen a rapid adoption of technology. In fact, I have some statistics here to share with you. From 2014 to 2019, $25 billion was invested in engineering and construction, with about $17 billion involving M&A or private equity. And from 2020 to 2022, we had about $50 billion invested in AEC, with an increase of 85% from the previous year. So clearly, we are investing, but productivity still is lagging. So we want to take a look at why more investment in technology hasn't necessarily translated into better results. And if we're looking at adoption as potentially one of those barriers, is it a barrier to that operational excellence we're all striving for? And so today we want to really look at two things, the data gap and data maturity, and how we go beyond just the technology components of this and really start to look at how we could better support the people in order to harness the data that they are creating, collecting. On this episode, Chris, this is going to be right up your alley. As Procore's global technology evangelist, this one's very much in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, I mean, I love talking about data. People, I refer to myself as a data nerd all the time. So I think, let me set it up by kind of explaining what the data gap really is. I think the first thing we need to understand is the data gap in construction is less about the absence of data, but more about our industry's struggle on how we leverage and connect that data. And so it's really the gap between potential of what we could do and what we're doing now in practice. We have the tools, we have the technologies, but sometimes integration, standardization, training are all lagging behind, preventing us as an industry from really taking full advantage of all the data and information that we have. Now, a few more stats. Deloitte reported that only 1 in 7, so about 13%, of construction businesses have access to daily insights on their job site. When you think about that for a second, it's pretty disappointing to think that a lot of us are operating without that daily level of insight for us to make decisions on how to move forward. And then only 43%, so less than half of them, report generating weekly insights from administration and supply data. So from information that they're getting from other sources, they're still not able to deliver that information. So those are pretty sobering numbers on when you think about all the ways that we could be harnessing insights from data and how that could contribute to better operations and more productivity. So let's talk about, what the potential for that is. And, everybody's talking about AI and why there's such a larger potential for these data sets. And I think one of the biggest things that we have to understand is that data is the backbone of so much of what we will be able to do with AI in the future, right? Without good information to rely on, we're kind of guessing, right? Now we have a lot of information and we have a lot of data. Is it good? Has it been standardized? Are we able to take advantage of that because we know that we have confidence in it I'm not quite sure that we're there yet, right? So in another Deloitte survey, only 55% of COOs said that the main barrier between putting AI to work successfully for their firms was truly understanding what was the right use case.
Right. Yep.
And so if you think about that, like, we know we want to use it,
Yep.
but we're just not super confident in what to use it for yet. And global data predicts that construction companies spending on AI platforms is expected to increase by 19.2% in 2024. But with the adoption of other tech, there's a lot of danger in investing without proper research and proper integration and data maturity. And so we could be at risk of the failure of some of these technologies reaching the ROI that were expected to come from them. So in order for our industry to move forward towards making data-driven decisions and truly address many of the productivity issues, businesses really need to focus on how we integrate those end-to-end solutions driven by adoption and standardization. Data-driven construction companies are going to dominate the future of construction. And there are many that are out there building the foundations to do this right now.
Is this a prediction?
It might be a prediction. A little bit of forecasting here.
Okay. Well, good. And I think our guest today is going to hopefully enlighten us on how this gets translated into an actual implementation with the business. So let me introduce our guest. Eric Whobrey is the Vice President of Innovation at ARCO and the Managing Partner at ARCO Ventures. Eric started out in PR and advertising and then made a leap into technical roles, effectively bridging sales, marketing, and technology, coming from a tech company that is the trifecta, I will say. His entry into construction came after a transformative conversation with an ARCO partner, sparking a passion to apply his skills in operational effectiveness and innovation to this sector. Since joining ARCO in 2018, Eric has been on a mission to make innovation less of a buzzword and more of a practical tool for optimizing business process. And I think this is pretty exciting here. Eric climbed from manager to VP in just 5 years within ARCO. So Eric, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. That's quite an introduction. I'm happy to be here.
Very, very glad to have you. And all that entire introduction, all of that is true. And we were excited to bring you on and have you tell a little bit about your story, because you do have a bit of an outsider's perspective that you're applying to this industry, specifically with ARCO. I want to start off, just tell us a little bit more about your role and what your innovation team is tackling specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. So the big picture, or the big mission for innovation at ARCO, is to find creative solutions to the big problems in our business and in our industry. That is purposely vague, because a lot of times what we're spending time in isn't necessarily dedicated to one part of the business. We're not talking to the safety team, or just the accounting team, or just project management. We're fitting into the gray area of all of those teams trying to work together and not necessarily knowing where to collaborate the most effective way possible. So we tend to fill in those gaps and identify those problems that maybe one group hasn't raised their hand and said, this is our problem, we're going to fix it. Maybe 3 different groups have identified a problem, and we raise our hand and say, we'll try to fix that.
Well, and I love that, because I think in many times, like, we talk about integrations around systems, but integrations across teams is incredibly important when you're trying to solve big problems like this.
Yeah, I think it's actually the main problem most of the time. Integrating a system, technically, if everyone's on the same page, is actually not terribly difficult. You just got to make sure all of the wires are lined up appropriately so that the data flows from one place to another.
Software doesn't have feelings.
Yeah.
So that makes it a little bit easier.
Do this every time forever. And it will say, great, no problem. I'll do it for 24/7 for the rest of time. And getting everyone to agree on what this term means relative to this system and that system is often the challenge.
And I kind of heard you talking through how your team is looking for those opportunities and how you're applying yourself to the business. But I'm curious, from the ARCO side, what was the motivation in creating an innovation team from ARCO's perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. ARCO has always had an entrepreneurial mindset. We have grown from, I think we were established in 1992, and we are a company that has gone from 0 to 2,000 employees in 30 years. We've got 45 offices around the country, and almost all of that has been organic growth. That's been giving people a lot of responsibility and expectations to deliver, and then rewarding them for that, and giving them a lot of trust and empowering them to drive the business in the best way possible. So that has led to a lot of creative-minded people that are always looking to do things a little bit better. And when it was a small office of 20 people in one city, that was pretty straightforward. You just sit around with your coworkers and find ways to do things a little bit better. But when you get to 40 plus offices, it gets a little more complicated. So leadership saw that, and I think they made a conscious decision to reinvest in their business in a way that gives time and space for some of that creative problem solving that they saw at a small scale and weren't able to recognize or realize as much at the larger scale without dedicated resources to it. And that's where we came from.
Well, and I love the fact that they went outside the industry to bring somebody like yourself in, to bring in somewhat fresh perspective. Not to say that like perspective is stale in construction, but I've found in several occasions when people come in from the outside, they just look at problems a little bit different.
Yeah, I mean, it helps that I was pretty clueless coming in. I had to ask a lot of questions, and I had to sit and listen. And sure, I had a different perspective, but I think some of it was just people being forced to explain the process to someone new, and then hearing themselves explain it and saying, "Oh, that does seem a little off."
And that seems like it took me a long time to describe
really how
that.
I'm doing it.
Yeah. That's crazy. I think about also, like, you mentioned about ARCO being an entrepreneurial company. I mean, I think your, we'll maybe call it meteoric rise, right, to vice president, shows that there is a commitment to entrepreneurial spirit, and that you were solving some of the largest problems in the industry, but also inside the company, and they want to invest more in that, allowing you to build out a team and to tackle more problems.
Yeah. I think it's not something. Innovation is like a nice euphemism for failing a lot and trying to find ways to do something better, but doing it worse 5 or 6 times before you get to, if you're lucky, 5 or 6 times before you get to a better way. So that does take an investment in time and resources and energy, understanding that failure is part of the process, not necessarily a flaw or a red flag to say that didn't work, we need to shut this down.
And I think you said something there. You said the F word, not the one we talked about before we started rolling, but the failure word, which is not uttered in construction. Just quickly, I'm curious, do you think it was that entrepreneurial spirit that had an appetite or an understanding of how to fail safely in the context of innovation?
We're definitely taking calculated risks, right? We're not messing with things that put people in danger. But when it comes to how we organize and store and manage our data, there are places we can take chances on that, and we can experiment, and we can understand failure as information, not as a failure. Because the point is to try a thing and measure it and see how it worked, and then try another thing and continue trying and measuring and iterating through that.
Well, and I can only imagine that the things that you're trying to tackle are things that, if successful, even if you fail a few times at them, are going to be exponentially valuable to the organization. So
that's the goal.
A few failures, and then you get it right, and it's 10x better.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, everybody's like, cool, we missed a few times, but we hit it big.
You get a short memory when it starts to work, right? Like you just raise the bar to now it's this way. It's better.
So I'd love to learn a little bit more about how your teams work is really starting to shape the way that the company thinks about leveraging data.
Well, I'm hopeful that our team is having that kind of impact. The reality is it's a really large organization with a lot of personality. I mean, growing as quickly as we have with that entrepreneurial mindset means there are a lot of people with a lot of ideas and opinions all over. And to say we are shifting the entire enterprise in one direction is probably a little strong, but I do think we've had an impact, and I think it comes from a relentless effort to communicate and educate people above all else. I mean, there's so much that we do technically that does lead to incremental improvements over time. But I think, to your point, a lot of the impact we've had is shifting the mindset of how we approach the work, where it's not necessarily a scary thing to try a new software or to tweak a process slightly, because there's this mentality around experiment and measure, not necessarily just go try a thing and hope it works. So our efforts in that space, I think, have had a pretty positive impact, where people are coming with more ideas, not necessarily just sitting and waiting for something to be handed to them, which was a big indicator for me that we were doing something right. When I started getting calls proactively my way or my team's way, I thought, we're doing something right if people are coming with ideas. And that's really where we started to see some momentum grow, and the team start to grow, and really our initiatives get a little bit bigger and a little more substantial.
So I love the fact that people are really starting to pull on your department and ask more of you. That means it's working. You're hitting the mark. But with that comes probably a tremendous amount of demand. How are you prioritizing? How are you figuring out which projects are the right ones to go and work on?
Yeah. So we've got this big dartboard in my office, and
we
everyone gets to
It's blindfolded. You just throw a dart.
You just throw it.
Yeah.
No, it is not that. We do have a massive list of ideas and requests, though, and we put that in one place, and we have a few approaches to how we identify what's top priority. Right? Executive buy-in is a great thing to have. So if we have a lot of executives excited about a thing, then it's easy to budget for it. It's easy to get momentum and to have that story kind of build around the enterprise. So it's hard to emphasize too much the importance of that buy-in from leadership on some of these priorities in these initiatives. Beyond that, often the leadership is looking for us to bring them things to say, here's what we think is important, here's what we've heard, because a major part of the effort is sitting and listening a lot, asking questions a lot. I often say my best days are when I go to a job site and sit in a job trailer with a superintendent and just keep my mouth shut and just ask what he's up to. Because that superintendent is incredibly creative. He's dealing with novel problems every day with no time or budget or solution in front of them, and they come up with solutions. So it's fun to hear that and listen to that, and they are not shy about the problems they face. So that's a great place to.
There's one thing that superintendents are not. It is usually shy.
Yes,
they will tell you what their problems are without a doubt.
Yeah, and they'll do it with a smile. I mean, they're happy to share. So we listen a lot. We ask a lot of questions. We are distributed throughout the business, so we're not necessarily in just one place. We're with accounting, we're with legal, we're with ops, we're with safety. We're talking with them and trying to serve as a water cooler, if you will, where ideas are shared and we can consolidate that and bring it to one place. And then we go to work trying to quantify those things. And sometimes it's heuristic based. Sometimes it's, does someone really hate something or someone really love something? If that's the case, then there's probably something more there. If they hate it, it's probably something a lot of people are dealing with that we could dig into and figure out there's a better way to solve this. If someone is really passionate about something, other people should probably be doing it that way. If they've figured out something, if they've discovered something really innovative and really creative. So we try to pay attention to that emotional register and sit at the poles of hate and love and use that to draw us at certain places. And then we really try to break down a problem into its individual parts. So a lot of times we will be interviewing individuals. We'll ask them to get into the step-by-step process of how a thing happens. So if you are creating or responding to an RFI, give me every single step you take. As mundane as it sounds, and it will take time, but it's worth it because you can then quantify what those steps look like, and you can extrapolate that to the 400 other people in the business that are doing that very thing. And that is where we start to see the impact bubble up, to see the things that are really expensive, that may be a hidden cost because it's just part of their day-to-day, and they think it's it's just part of the work. Or we see sometimes that it's something that is pretty isolated, and maybe it's something that we don't need to spend time on, at least not our group that's looking to find those high impact items.
Yeah, I used to always tell people, find something that a lot of people hate, and you'll find a problem that is worth solving. Because if you can find that thing, and hopefully maybe even it's an easy problem to solve, you'll gain so much support. Because
that's the dream.
Yeah,
like,
you're
things
like,
people hate that are easy to solve.
That's to solve. That's like top right quadrant. And then when you run out of those things, you go down into other things, right? So how is, the technology and the integration of data, and like, how is that shaping the work that you are doing? Like, is some of it really focused on driving those policies, those procedures?
Sure.
Or is it more of it around like trying to streamline the processes?
Yeah. So a lot of the organization and integration of data is actually presenting opportunities for us, because the more organized data we have, the more we can do with that data, the more we can slice and dice it and turn it back to the business and provide value from that. So we pay attention to a lot of things starting to kind of coalesce into a consistent thing, even if it's with one division or one part of the business. We have our antennas up for that, because that gives us the opportunity to experiment with that new data set. Even if it's small, or just a little bit here or there, we can play with that, and we can start to show quick returns on it and say, if we do more of this, then we get more of that, and that can get people really excited. So I think some of our work is trying to get people to do that, and some of our work is then capitalizing on the outcome of people doing a thing more consistently. Because I think oftentimes there's the goal is to get people to do a thing consistently, and then you get there and you're like, thank God, everyone's doing it consistently. The job is done. But that's actually the starting point. That's now we can do more with that, and we can be more effective because there's a consistency, and there's an organization that gives us more intelligence, more data, more opportunity to work with what we've got.
Yeah, and I really like that point of like starting with a place you have some data, you have some information, you have some consistency, and then giving people something back from it, something that they can use, because then they're like, now I know why I need to invest the time to follow the procedure, the policy, use the tool they're asking me to do, because I get something back out of it at the end of it. Now, I think you have a pretty good example of a place where you had some data that, you were like, I think we could do more with this.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the subs rating tool and how that came about?
Yeah. So this is an effort that the innovation team took on a few years ago now, and has been running ever since. One thing that Procore does not do particularly well is provide a place for our associates to rate subcontractor relationships relative to projects and specific commitments within that project. But something Procore does do very well is organize commitments on a project. So as we started to see our associates put more of their subcontractor commitments into Procore as just a turnkey thing that is just part of the process now. We enter our commitments into Procore so that we can see that summary of everybody working on the job. We saw that and we thought, okay, there's something there. All of our commitments in one place, with an API that allows us to access that pretty effectively is an opportunity. So we dug into that a little bit, and as we were talking to project teams, the topic of rating kept coming up. So we dug into that a little more, and we went into the I call it the unit economics of rating a subcontractor, where we asked the full picture, the full process, which starts with someone on the job spending a couple hours putting together a spreadsheet of every subcontractor that's worked on that job. This is at the end of the job, by the way. So everyone from ground break to completion, they're trying to find all of that information. It's in a folder in our shared...
Most of which they've forgotten at this point.
Yeah, right. So they're trying to rewind the clock. They go and they're asking PMs and superintendents, saying, who were the people we worked with? So they spend a few hours putting together that spreadsheet. Then there's a 2-hour meeting with the entire team, That is the superintendent, the project managers, the project coordinators, the safety person, anybody that's worked on that job. If you can get them all there, you put them in a room for 2 hours and you go through this spreadsheet and you give ratings of 1 to 10 or 1 to 5. No one really had a standard way of doing it. You just got the spreadsheet together and you rated them. Then you put it in a folder, never to be seen again.
So back to the problem of we have plenty of data.
Yep.
It's just not usable.
Yep. The data's there. No one can find it. And it took a long time to get it. And it's all different, but it's there. So as we talked to more project teams and saw this like consistent problem that was we're spending time doing this thing that then no one can access, that seemed like a problem. And it's really, really valuable data, right? Knowing if you had a positive or negative interaction with a subcontractor on a job can make or break a job sometimes, especially if it's a negative interaction. And that's not always a subcontractor doing a bad job. Sometimes it's just the dynamic of the project being negative. And having that context is really, really valuable. So we also identified that and said, it seems like we want access to this. And we put a brief together and we took it to a couple of our executives and they said, absolutely, this is a problem, let's solve it. So the proposed solution we had was tapping into the Procore API and creating a very simple interface that pulls any project that has commitments associated to it. So we have that stored in our common data environment, a simple dropdown that is just a list of project names. And the only projects that show up are projects that have Procore commitments in them, which is a nice incentive to project managers to get their commitments in Procore. Even if it's a shell, like that's fine, as long as it's there. That's a positive step. So creating little carrots along the way, we have this simple dropdown where anytime during a job, you can go rate a subcontractor. And you just click your project, you open that page, which is a dedicated page to that project, and it's a list of all the commitments with the subcontractors that have worked. And it takes about 15 seconds to pick a sub, hit 1 to 5 stars, and leave a comment if you want. All of our associates' data is baked into them having logged into our common data environment. So we know it's the safety manager rating the relationship with the earthwork contractor on project XYZ on June 1st of 2024. So there's all of this context baked right into that 15-second interaction that we then have surface when someone is looking for subcontractors that they want to work with on their next job. And what we saw as a result of surfacing this information, making it really easy to do, taking it from several hours of multiple people's time to 15 seconds each time it needs to happen. One, that's an order of magnitude cheaper to execute. So that's really exciting for the executive team to see that savings. And the innovation team tried to quantify that. Everyone kind of laughs at the numbers that we throw out, but it's significant savings on the execution of that effort, which happens on every job we ever do. And then the back half of that, where people are seeing these ratings surfaced, is it didn't necessarily speed up the decision on who to work with on a job. It sped up connections to people in the organization. So instead of, it didn't shortcut the relationship part where you want to know what happened on a job. It just instantly connected you to the person that you want to talk to. And when you're in an organization of 2,000 people, that is a really, really hard thing. Even if you find it in a folder on a server somewhere, you still have to go up the tree of that folder tree to find the PM that was working on it. And they may or may not have been the one that was specifically rating that thing. Whereas here, you can see John Doe rated it a week and a half ago, and you can go to them on Teams and you can say, what happened on this? Like either you loved it or you hated it. Tell me more. And that is the context that's needed for us to make smarter decisions on hiring subcontractors on our jobs.
Well, it's so incredibly important that it's like in real time too,
Yeah.
right? So like it's not waiting till the end of the job, which could be 2-3 years later.
Yeah.
Right? Where maybe half the people that worked with them at the beginning of the job where they did fantastic,
Yep.
but then they just fell down at the back end of the job. So everybody, that's all they remember.
Yeah. Every earthwork subcontractor is done a third of the way into the job, right? So there's a lot there that when you get to the end, you're like, was that good or was that bad?
Yeah.
I don't remember. But if you do it right then, and you know who loves our rating tool? The legal team.
I'm sure.
They really like getting in there, and they can, anytime they want, they can go on that job. They know they can go submit a rating, and they are on the polls, right? If they love someone, they want people to know. And if they did not love someone, they want people to know that too.
Well, and I also think it's incredibly meaningful to be able to give the feedback back to the contractors, right? Even if they did a poor job, like so many times people are like, well, why am I not getting any more work from this general contractor? I
Sure.
don't understand. And then like nobody has given them any feedback. And now you can be like, well, listen, you fell down on the last 3 jobs, right? Like
Right.
go talk to these PMs, but like this is what you did wrong and this is the notes that they gave. And like, so it's really hard for me to give you the next job
Yeah.
now. Right?
Yeah.
Like, what are you going to do differently? And at least we can have that conversation openly and really start to leverage the data and information that we have available to us.
Yeah. I think a lot of the opportunities we have is like shorter paths to context for people trying to maintain relationships, because the industry is still and probably always will rely on those strong relationships continuing to push things forward, and just speeding up the process of like entering something into a system here and having it there ready for you is where we have a ton of opportunity. That's where we spend a lot of time.
And I think that brings up a really good point. I feel like we're shifting kind of into now, how do we do this at scale? How do we start to create some of these changes at scale? And Chris, when Chris and I are looking at this, he tends to geek out on the tech side, and then I tend to get inquisitive on the people side. So I wanted to talk to you about what type of cultural shifts are required by the organization in order to maximize the benefit of what your team is doing. You speak like a true marketer. When you talked about hating or loving something, that is marketing like genius. You do not want to be lukewarm. You don't want people who hear your brand name and go, I don't have opinions.
Yeah.
You want to be loved or hated. Like that's the name of the game. And so as you're looking at, there's a lot of status quo that exists even within an entrepreneurial business like ARCO. What are you starting to recognize as those cultural shifts that need to occur within the business to really maximize and scale some of these innovations?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think a lot of it comes from that education side. We spend a substantial amount of time and resources on training and education. And I think that's something that's been true for ARCO for its entire existence, which does present challenges as we grow and expand and fragment. You know, it's hard to do that perfectly all the time, but the commitment remains. And I think it gives people the expectation or the understanding that learning is part of the job. And you don't necessarily sit in that status quo comfortably at ARCO. If you're sitting still, you're doing something wrong. And that's not to say we're constantly trying to break shit and do things differently, but it is a mentality that I've felt very fortunate to step into that. So I'd love to like toot my own horn and say, oh, I really changed things here. But I think I got very lucky that I stepped into an organization where some of that was baked in. And the way we hire and the way that we incentivize people is very much true to that mentality. That being said, I hear all the time, this is the way we do it, and let's not mess with it, right? So that does exist within the organization. And I think in the communication and education side from the innovation group and how we try to coach our executive teams and coach our leaders to kind of encourage or empower the pursuit of improvement and, you know, iterative improvement over time I can simply put it as the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, right? A lot of our efforts are the main output of our productivity is from a very small set of things that we do. And a lot, it's the Pareto principle kind of rears its head in a lot of different ways. Like OSHA has the fatal 4 that are like the 4 most common in things that cause workplace incidents on construction sites. That's the 80-20 rule, right? There are 400 things that happen, but these 4 are the primary source for big problems on construction site safety. We see the same with the way that our project teams work. We have 20% of our clients are producing 80% of our revenue, right? That's not the actual numbers, but we see it all over. And we try to identify those areas that we can look at that and say, okay, if this is something that we can concentrate on and improve this thing that has a big impact, then that's going to have a lot more impact than the 100 things that we could focus on here that feels overwhelming and feels insurmountable. And I think we run into this a lot with the data gap. We'll never have perfect data. and that's something that we've tried to hammer home. We are not in the pursuit of perfecting our data sets. We are in the pursuit of finding the opportunities to get better and find those big areas that we can leverage data to operate more effectively. And I think that maybe that's a thing that is that's moving the needle for us. Like that permission to not be perfect and really push people to think about what can be better, not what can be perfect. I think does unlock a lot of creativity, and especially when it comes to data. Like, it'd be nice if it was perfect. I would prefer that if everyone did it correctly all the time, and then I had this beautiful data set that I could just utilize however I want.
Yeah.
But coming to them with that mentality that we can get a little bit better today by trying something a little bit different, or scaling something in a way that helps. I think people get excited about that and then lean into that a little bit more. And that's helped shift our culture in that direction of what are the things that we can focus on and not boil the ocean, not make everything perfect, but get better.
And there's a follow-on to that then. If your culture is shifting, and I love this idea of the goal is not perfection within the data. The goal is incremental improvement that then gives us that operational leverage that feeds back into the business. So my question then is, as that starts to take hold within the organization, I'd imagine you're redefining some of those skill sets that are required at the leadership level, because if you're operationally continuing to improve, there's definitely going to be a different way of making decisions. And so much of construction has always been gut level decision, shouting match in the field. And with so much technology, and especially this next generation, Gen Z, others, they're digital natives. They're used to getting information, having access to information at their fingertips, and not shouting at each other to solve a problem, but actually to digest the data and then make a decision.
Yeah.
How is this impacting the skill sets that you're requiring for that leadership level?
Yeah. So there's a framework that I have recently learned about, and I'm going to absolutely butcher it, but I encourage people to study it, is the Griner curve. And I think it's the general gist of it is organizations go through a maturation phase, and there are crises that happen at each maturity level of a business. And I think certainly at ARCO, and I think the industry is seeing varying levels of that Griner curve being met, because a lot of times the crisis is a crisis of delegation, or a crisis of prioritization, or a crisis of organization. And those are the things that our businesses are running into, where you need a different skill set to manage a team of project managers than you do to manage subcontractors on a construction site, right? So a lot of our focus on the training and education side, where we've got the learning and development team really working on this to prepare our associates to be leaders beyond just on the job site, is around that ability to delegate, ability to organize, ability to prioritize beyond yourself. Because it's really easy to run a construction job and just get tunnel vision, and oftentimes beneficial to have that tunnel vision on this construction job needs to get done. And to think outside that can be detrimental to the construction job happening. But when you level up, it can be detrimental to have that tunnel vision. So it is a matter of investing in our people and really identifying those crises. And the term crisis is a little bit, I think it's a little dramatic, but it does kind of identify that opportunity for change, or opportunity to shift a priority or a strategy. And that's where I think ARCO has seen that. We've grown very fast over a very short amount of time, and we sped through these crises, right? We were seeing them at once a year. We were running into this oh my God, how do we delegate? How do we promote our best project managers into people managers and give them the skills to do that? I don't think there's any one way of accomplishing that. I think it's a matter of investing in your people and getting talented individuals dedicated to understanding how to retrain or upskill or enable your people to learn those skills.
And I do want to comment that I don't think that's unique just to construction.
That's true. Yeah.
Even companies like Procore that have grown and scaled really quickly over time. Yeah. I think that's just an organizational challenge.
Absolutely. So, yeah. The Griner curve is universal. That is a thing that every business is going to experience. And it's a phenomenon that you can look at basically any business growth and see it run into these crises pretty consistently.
Well, and I've also been part of organizations where I've seen people go up that curve, hit that crises, and then fall back down.
Yeah, right.
And it's like Sisyphus. They're just trying to push the rock up the
Yeah.
hill over and over again,
Yeah.
and can't quite get there because they're not addressing that major milestone that they have to change things to. Let's shift gears a little bit to talk a little bit more about the data. I'd love to know, when you think about the data gap and you think about data in construction, what are the opportunities that you think we're missing today?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's immense opportunity with data in the field being collected, namely visual data, whether it's drone footage or video or photo capture. I think there's a lot happening on site. Sensor data too. There's tons of information being produced on a job site, and the ability to collect and organize and utilize that is still pretty challenging, at least to do it consistently at scale. So I think there's a big opportunity there. I think that's something that we're focusing on to some degree, and we're trying to tie a lot of that field data back to what's happening in the office.
So in short, back to, we've got plenty of data.
Absolutely.
It's about, how do we organize it? How do we make sense of it? How do we actually drive some actionable insights out of it, and then hopefully make some decisions based upon it that make us operate more efficiently?
Yeah. I think there's stuff too. I mean, cost data is readily available, but it's buried, right? And maybe this is just ARCO, but I have a sneaking suspicion it's pretty universal in our world. The first 10 years of invoices at ARCO were reviewed by hand and then scanned into a scanning device that turned a PDF into an image and then loaded that into our ERP, never to be seen again. And there's lots of really valuable insights in that invoice that has, a cover sheet with what's being charged in that pay application, and a G702 and 703 with all the details about what happened, right? There's a lot there that I think, if it were captured and organized, could be utilized a lot more effectively. And I think ARCO is utilizing that data, right? Like, that's an opportunity I think's in front of our face, and a lot of people have recognized that. But I think it is still an industry opportunity to get a lot better at that.
Do you think some of the recent advancements in technology, right? Say it, AI, right? Some of the things that are happening there.
How long did it take?
Yeah, how long did it take for us to get here?
We did pretty good.
I think we did pretty good.
Yeah.
Like, does that help us make sense of that faster?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
The ability to process unstructured data is the strength of, air quotes, AI. It's the strength of large language models. And it's the strength of the machine learning and compute capabilities that we have that are cheap enough to access for almost anyone now. So that is definitely, like, we are at the start of a hockey stick growth of this kind of thing being utilized, and I think not talked about a ton, because it still feels pretty special. It feels pretty proprietary to be able to process a massive amount of data that is Word documents, PDFs, drawings, and return something insightful or contextual that didn't take thousands of hours to process. It took hours or minutes. And you see, I mean, trunk text is definitely at the forefront of this. Document crunch is definitely at the forefront of this. Like, there are tools available to us right now that have been doing this and have been able to scale it because it's gotten cheaper. It's more accessible. I think the most exciting thing about OpenAI and ChatGPT for me was the API. They made it so easy. And I think that's why we've seen a proliferation of these capabilities, is that with 15 lines of code, you can do some real damage. And that is extremely exciting and big for our industry that has tons of unstructured data to sort through.
Well, it can't be slept on, the fact that everybody's talking about it is actually a huge advantage, right?
Absolutely.
AI is not new to our space. Machine learning, computer vision, natural language processing, they're not new. They've been around in our industry for a while, but other folks have tried to make this work, but people just couldn't grasp the concept of it.
Yeah.
But now the fact that it's, in every Instagram feed, your RSS feed, Construction Dive, no matter where you get your news, everybody's talking about it. People are like, oh, okay, I guess this is here to stay, and this is not some like newfangled technology that nobody quite understands.
Yeah.
So I think that's really interesting.
One of the things that I think you and I had talked about before, as we're kind of talking about the impact of data and these net new values that are being realized with the innovation of AI, you were talking to me before about some of the ways that your team is interacting with owner teams. And creating this net new value as a general contractor that didn't exist before. Could you tell us a little bit about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our ability to kind of report and collaborate with our clients, with the owners that we work with, has improved dramatically because we can process more data in less time and organize it in a way that provides some insight to the owner. And sometimes it's at a portfolio level. So our repeat customers, we can give them a really great view of what we're doing with them and how things are going. Or we're a design build firm. So a lot of times we're in the thick of the kind of land development and site planning and due diligence of where to build something. So there are a lot of tools there that we've been able to lean into that are AI adjacent, or at least have included it into their marketing materials, but are really just like churning through data in a way that allows us to do a lot more with our customers or even prospective clients in an effective and concise way that's really, really resonating with people. It is no longer this like highfalutin, don't let the tech nerds out of the closet in the back of the office. Like, trust us, they're doing good stuff.
Hey, some of them like the closet. They're very happy that they don't have to talk to people and they just want to crunch numbers all day.
Yep.
I want to go back to, it's funny, you kind of said, hey, is that a forecast? But maybe it's not as much of a forecast because it sounds like you're doing some of it already, right? ARCO is becoming a data-driven company.
Yes.
And you're using that to service your owner, your clients, in a higher level than you ever had before. And I mean, I have to imagine that's part of the strategy, right? And a big piece of what your team is working on.
Yeah, we have we are agnostic to any part of the business being our main driver of success for the innovation group. So we're working with the business development team, and in a lot of ways in how they can operate more effectively, just as much as we're working with operations teams on how they can operate more effectively. We are looking at top line, bottom line, in anything in between, because the problems we're finding are not predicated on being field problems or accounting problems or any one thing. So we definitely spend a lot of time on the front end of the job, talking with them about, what's resonating with people, what can we focus on, how can we qualify potential clients better? How can we really focus our energy on the business development side to the right places that have a higher likelihood of success? Because it's expensive to chase customers. We do not have short sales cycles. They can be 1 to 2 years sometimes. So the more we can qualify that up front and say, this is a real opportunity that has real money behind it, that work could start on soon, versus this is a pie in the sky thing that may happen in the next 10 years, but nobody knows. Getting some information layered on top of what I would say like brilliant work that our business development team does, just from being networkers and relationship builders and really intimately familiar with their industries and their verticals, is like pile data on top of that and find ways to surface it to them that points them in the right direction.
Call back to our first episode, Josh Bone talking about Moneyball of construction, right?
Oh, yeah.
Let's go bet on the projects that we think are going to be the most profitable with the clients that we want to do a lot of business with, that have a bunch in the pike, and not worry so much about those jobs that we're not sure if they're ever going to come around. We've had bad experiences working with them. They're in an area where we don't have a strong sub base, and really making those big bets to be intelligent about the growth. Love it.
Well, I think there's one additional question that I haven't heard asked, and you've spent some time now with ARCO and during your career journey, and came in with some pretty high aspirations. Is there anything that's being missed? Anything that you're seeing, which I feel bad asking it because I feel like your team is probably very busy, but is there anything that you're seeing that's currently being missed?
Yeah. I think robots are still kind of scary on construction sites. And I think you and I were talking about this at a different event. I think it was Jit Key that said, like, robots as tools are going to proliferate, not robots as replacements for humans.
Yeah.
We have experimented with a few different implementations. The RoboDog walking on its own to scan a site is pretty freaky when you're like seeing it in action, right? There's a lot of opportunity for that to grow in value, and the cost to implement is coming down. So there's going to be a Goldilocks zone where that starts to kick off, because you can do it for a cost-effective way. So I think I think that time has actually probably arrived for a lot of different implementations, but it's kind of it's uncomfortable. And it's a hard thing. It's very easy in the field to, understandably, to say, we're not going to do it that new way. We're going to do it the way we know works, because we want this building to not fall down. So we're going to do it the way we know works. And I love that, because I'm really glad the roof isn't caving in on us. Like, that's a thing I think we should continue to be really, really dedicated to. But there are those implementations that are starting to become more trustworthy and more collaborative, for lack of a better term, right? It's not letting a robot take over. It's letting a robot do an activity over and over and over that's being supervised, that saves someone's back so that they can not be in chronic pain all the time, and they can go home earlier, and they can work on more jobs. Like, there's a lot there. There's a lot of opportunity there that I think we're probably a little bit slow on as an industry.
I love this concept of robots as tools. Yeah. I mean, I just think that it is the augmentation of the workforce that we have today to make them more productive, to make them more healthy. There's so many benefits to it. And I think we will see more cases. We see layout, we see drywall, we see painting. The other one I saw the other day was actually doing installation of like attachments on the side of a building.
The facade.
That thing is awesome.
That's cool. It's happening here in Austin, I think.
The people just, instead of having to lean over 30 stories up in the air and worry that something, getting vertigo, who knows, right? You now have a robot that can do that job, but it's supervised by a human, right? And I think that is a huge opportunity for our industry to date.
How long did it take to get from the hammer to the nail gun?
It's a great question.
Like that took a really long time, didn't it?
Yeah.
So
there's still plenty of carpenters that swear by their hammer and won't use a nail gun as well, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, since we're on the topic, let's think big, right? Before we wrap up here, right? We're maturing our data and tech usage. We're really starting to tap into the potential of data-driven decision making. What's the future of our industry look like? What's that future state going to be like?
I see a way more productive industry. I see a lot more things happening on site that are automated or remote controlled. I see project managers that were previously working on one job working on 5 jobs just as effectively or more effectively. I see a lot more prefabrication and offsite construction for parts of the work that can be systematized and put on a manufacturing line. And I think all of that leads to quieter job sites, because you're going to have fewer people, and we have fewer people anyway. So we're going to see that trend move in a direction where that smaller workforce is going to be able to produce a lot more and do it a lot more consistently. And I have a lot of ideas about how that happens. And like the big umbrella term of AI, I think does play a big part, because there is just, I just listened to an interview with this guy, Victor something, in Cheyenne, Wyoming. He ran for mayor, and he had created a chatbot that he named Vic, that he said if he's elected mayor, he will run every decision by Vic, and Vic will decide what to do as mayor. And he, he did it as a stunt, and he like came in 4th in his primary. He got like 300 votes. So don't worry, we're not running into mayors, GPT mayors anytime soon. But I think the point he was making was salient, right? He ran this tool through several committee votes where there were 450 pages of documentation related to that committee vote that not a single person on that committee had read. Mm-hmm. And Vic did. And Vic made an objective choice of yes or no, which they validated and said, that's probably the right decision. And he did that over and over until he thought, maybe this isn't the craziest thing, that these tools can help us to predict the right answer that we can then make the judgment on whether it's right or not, and cut out that time of the 450 pages of which we're going to read 10 of. And that's not to diminish the importance of reading those 10 pages, right? Or doing the 450 pages a few times to get to the point of expertise and understanding, but then using these tools to 2x, 3x, 4x your productivity so that you can do more with less.
And I think that's really where we are currently in the information age as an industry that produces a ton of data that is somewhat messy and unstructured and not easy to recall, find, analyze, and then distribute. This is what we need. We as humans have wonderful, amazing brains that are not computers. They are brains, and they control a lot more than just information.
Yeah.
So something that on the front end can help us make sense of the volume of information that is produced. And then we as the human make those intuitive, analytical decisions, I think this is where we are.
Yeah.
So I want to this has been great. Thank you so much for joining us today on the
Absolutely.
podcast.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for
sitting
inviting.
down with us. I want to kind of synthesize a little bit about at least what I heard today.
Yeah.
So you talked a lot about innovation, and it's really more than just the technology. It also talks to the people, some of the services, and the net new value that you're providing for owners. Culture really came up as a big piece of being the vehicle that allows these innovations to scale, that and some new skill sets. And that this last piece, and I think you just mentioned it perfectly with that story, is bridging the data gap is the most important first step to unlock emerging technologies like AI and really achieve that operational efficiency that I think we're trying to strive for. But again, so much information, human brain, challenging to do. I think you have some job security here, Eric, is what I'm trying to say.
I hope so. I sure hope so. I make this joke at work that being the VP of innovation, and I'm making air quotes around my job title, doesn't feel like great job security sometimes. So I do hope that there's plenty of opportunity.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate you. We appreciate you coming on the show to talk with us and share some of the lessons learned and the insights that you're gathering. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, of course.
Before you run out the door, we've got a few rapid fire questions that we've been asking everyone. Now, in fairness, you know what the questions are, so hopefully we'll nail these. What book are you currently reading or listening to that you would recommend to someone else?
Okay. I've been waiting the entire interview for this question because I'm a big reader. And I recently finished, both my wife and I read this. I read it first and I gave it to her. It's a series of books, and she lapped me very quickly because these books are so good. It's called The Murderbot Diaries. Okay. The first book is called All Systems Red. It's like 150 pages. You can read it in a couple of days. It's phenomenal. And it's an 8-book series right now. And Martha Wells is contracted for 9 and 10. And for those of you who maybe are more into TV and film, Apple TV did just pick it up as a series that they are producing right now. So those books are some of my favorite books that I've ever read. And that was just a recent discovery in the last year.
Love it. That's fantastic. So what's your go-to source for getting new information, different perspectives to inform your perspective?
Yeah. So, I try to read a lot, and I have recently started trying to read more fiction because I do think that it presents ideas in a really interesting, creative way that kind of shifts my perspective on how I view things. So that's kind of an esoteric answer. But I also read and listen to other things. I do try to consume news from a lot of different places, whether it's New York Times or The Economist or Wall Street Journal, just to try to see what's going on in the world. I also listen to a lot of podcasts. Hard Fork is one that I'm pretty high on right now. The Knowledge podcast is really fascinating and brings on a lot of people from different perspectives that have definitely shifted the way that I view the world. So that is one that I really, really appreciate. And Lex Fridman is another one. If you can find the time to listen to a 3-hour interview with Lex Fridman, they're often very insightful and interesting and can help to kind of see how other people view the world.
Love it. All right. So you're going to give some advice to your younger self. Just one piece of advice.
Yeah.
What would it be?
Just shut up. Just listen a little bit more. You don't have that many interesting things to say. And I realize the irony of me like talking directly into a microphone saying this. But as a young Eric could have done with more listening, I think. More active listening. That's number one.
I could probably relate. My wife would probably.
I was going to say, that's a husband lesson right there.
And I think mine might be, you can't fix everything.
Sure.
Yeah, that's probably the other one too. What's one trend or innovation you think will shape the future of construction?
Is it a cop-out to say artificial intelligence? I think it's the ability to process data, process massive amounts of data in shorter amounts of time in meaningful ways. Like the compute power available to us and the data that is training systems to understand that, I think is number one. You'll see it manifest in lots of different ways, but it will be that little kernel.
It's that at its core.
Yeah.
Love it. All right. If our industry, construction, had a tagline, what would it be?
So this is biased, but I think a better way is a meaningful tagline. It's simple, but I do think that this is an industry. I did not work in this industry for the first decade of my career. So coming from the outside in, I am floored every day at how much people care about this work and how much they want to do better. And I think that's something that I've seen over and over and over, not just at ARCO, but across the industry.
Excellent. I don't think I could think of a better stopping point than that. Thank you so much, Eric. Really appreciate you coming on. And for those of you who are listening in, if anything we talked about here today resonated with you, please subscribe, like, share it with your network. And we'll keep bringing you stories of leaders who are not just reshaping the industry, but truly harnessing the power of construction.